Hello, everyone. I'm Jamie Carroll from The Gift of Psychosynthesis, and joining me again today as my guest is Ann GILA, who is obviously very well known for co-authoring a number of classic psychosynthesis books, um, including The Primal Wound, but also this one that we're going to be looking at or basing our session today on, which is A Psychotherapy of Love. So this is an important book of hers, and we're going to be relying on this very heavily today as we go about discussing a model which you, Anne, and your husband, John Firman, describe as the 5 stages of psychosynthesis. Um, as I understand, this is like a model that attempts to identify where a client is in their own journey towards psychological authenticity and spiritual maturity. But you can correct me on that in a moment. I would just say as well before we dive in that hopefully this conversation will be of interest not just to those who are training in psychosynthesis or those who are psychosynthesis therapists, but perhaps for someone who a layperson who's just heard about psychosynthesis and they're interested in it for therapy for themselves. Maybe this particular video will help you just understand how psychosynthesis works at a slightly deeper level, and maybe it can help you understand where you are in your own process. So, and let's start with this question, which is this 5 stages of psychosynthesis. Why is this model important, and what is it setting out to achieve?
Good questions. Why is it important? Well, you know what's surprising to me, and I'm not sure I'm going to first respond to that, but what's surprising to me is that I don't find the stages discussed or presented in almost any other psychosynthesis writing. In fact, I was just reviewing some books last night that we have here on the shelf because we have a lot, most of the major books written by psychosynthesis people, professionals, and we're the only one who really talks about the 5 stages. I mean, actually, Assagioli had 4 stages, and we made them 5 stages. And they so much hold the journey of the person, which you can call the psychosynthesis journey, but the journey of the person. And so it's, again, so surprising to me that they're not talked about, discussed, presented in other writings. And just to say, you held up the Psychotherapy of Love book because we do go through the stages as they would sort of present themselves when you're working with clients. However, the stages themselves are also written about in the our second book. Yeah, so they're presented there also. So then coming back, so what was your question again?
It was about why is this model important and what's it setting out to achieve?
Well, for me, it's important because it gives me a sense of where the person is on their journey. I mean, for me, it's almost a diagnostic tool. If psychosynthesis has a diagnostic tool, it is a diagnostic tool about where someone is on the journey in their life. It doesn't mean that I do anything in particular with it, but it informs me. It informs me. Yeah, it informs me when I'm working with a client.
I guess you could say they're probably 2 consumers of the model, aren't they? I mean, the main consumer might well be the therapist themselves, because it can give them a sense of where the client is on their on a particular part of their life and where they're heading and what struggles they're dealing with. But I guess maybe you could argue that it's also interesting for a client themselves. I mean, it's not something I would necessarily talk about overtly with a client, but because it would just be too much maybe. But for some of those who are really interested in the process, actually for them to understand where they are, and for me personally, when I've been in therapy, those sort of models are helpful. I find them helpful.
Yeah, they are to some people. Some people could care less, but they are certainly to some people. But just to say also, as we begin or continue talking about this, is that it's a stage model, but it's not a ladder. It's not like you go from one stage to the next, and you can be in various stages at the same time. So yes, it informs me, but it doesn't mean that we don't return to those earlier stages at various times in our life, and that more than one stage may be happening at the same time.
Do you know, I wanted to, you sort of got onto another question I wanted to ask, which, well, an observation as much as a question, which was, I suppose, about the idea when you have stages and levels, it always sort of brings in this idea of hierarchies and sometimes, dominator hierarchies, which can have bad reputations. But I kind of feel that this model you're discussing it is more in the order of like a natural hierarchy. And you were sort of, I think you may have said this in one of your books. You talked about it more as like concentric rings. Did you do that, or did I?
Now, the concentric rings, if that's what you're thinking of, apply more to the developmental model that we present in our writing.
I've got a bit confused there, but I just wanted to make the point then just about the hierarchies and how important it is. I just want you to talk a little bit to that, to say that there are levels. Obviously, you do, one does move up levels, but how would you sort of address those worries about it having a hierarchy?
Well, I mean, we certainly say, I mean, we often say that it's not a ladder, that we're not climbing a ladder here. And sometimes we compare it to the 12-step program, the 12 steps and the 12-step programs, because when you go through the 12 steps, you can see that sort of as a ladder in a way, or as a hierarchy. But when you reach the 12th step, often you return to the first one again, or even before you reach the 12th one, you return to the first one again. So it's the same thing with the stages. You hit moments in your life where it throws you back. I can give an example. I mean, let me think. Yeah, like for example, if someone is called to do something in their life, I can't come up with a specific example, but that would be in stage 3 and 4, they get a sense that they're called to a particular action, or a particular, just particular action in their life. And so in stage 4, you're beginning to plan that action and what that action would involve. You begin to take that action after you're planning, and all of a sudden you get really scared. Fear arises. And that sends you back to stage 1 to explore, what is this fear about? Here I feel called to do this particular thing in my life. It feels right. In a dialogue with the deepest in me, it feels this is what I'm to do. I'm getting affirmation from those around me and from whatever I take in that it is right to do. And yet I begin to proceed in that direction. And then all of a sudden fear arises. I have no consciousness of what that fear is about. And so then I need to go back to stage 1 and explore what that fear is. So it sends me back again. So that's how the stages get, I mean, you can get involved in terms of being in more than one stage at a time.
Is it also fair to say that it's you can be at different stages for different areas of your life? So for, say, your relationship with your husband or wife, you could be at one level, but how you perform in your work environment or what have you, or how you relate to others who aren't close to you, could be completely different on a different level
Right.
into you
That's a very important point. You can be in different stages in different areas of your life.
at the same time.
Yeah,
Yeah,
at the same.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
We talk about them as facets, they're not, just as facets of an overall process.
You've sort of touched on this, but I still just want to go back to it. The inspiration for the five stages, you talked about Assagioli having four. Could you just sort of build out just a little bit how you and John sort of came to doing this?
Yeah, I'm reaching for a book right now. When Assagioli, and we actually haven't even said thus far, where's my glasses? I'm sorry.
That's all
We
right.
haven't, they're not in my head. This is very strange. Oh, there they are. I'm sorry. They'll have to cut that out if he wants to, whoever edits this video. Though I think leaving those kinds of moments in or make it more real. Um,
We'll
um,
leave it in, don't worry.
Let me see where I was going to go with that. Okay. What I was going to say just then was that we actually haven't even named the stages. We probably should name the stages as we talk about this. But what Assagioli, the reason that we did 5, because Assagioli actually, there were 4, Assagioli had 4 stages. We took his 4 stages, we renamed them, and our terms are similar but a little bit different for the naming of them. And then as he introduces the stages in his writing in his book called Psychosynthesis, a basic text or a basic collection of writings, I think it's called, he actually, I'm sorry, so we had 4. He had 1, 2, 3, 4. We have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, because our 0 is actually based on a paragraph he wrote as he was introducing his 1, 2, 3, 4. And that paragraph we think is one of the most significant writings of his. And it really is, because our stage 0 is called survival of wounding. When you read that paragraph that introduces his 4 stages, that's exactly what he's describing. He just didn't give it a stage name. And that's why and I think in response to your question, that's why we have 5 stages rather than 4. They're not so different from what Assagioli was saying, except he just didn't name it as a stage.
Right.
And it's it's a very painful stage. And I'm tempted to read it as a paragraph. I don't know if you would want me to read it.
Go for it. Go for it.
Go for it? Okay. He calls it the fundamental infirmity of man. You can say man or not. So he says, in our ordinary life, we are limited and bound in 1,000 ways. Just to remind you that his language is very old. The prey of illusions and phantasms, the slaves of unrecognized complexes, tossed hither and thither by external influences, blinded and hypnotized by deceiving appearances. No wonder then that man, in such a state, is often discontented, insecure, and changeable in his moods, thoughts, and actions. Feeling intuitively that he is one, and yet finding that he is divided unto himself. He is bewildered and fails to understand either himself or others. No wonder that he, not knowing or understanding himself, has no self-control and is continually involved in his own mistakes and weaknesses. That so many lives are failures, or at least limited and saddened by diseases of mind and body, or tormented by doubt, discouragement, and despair. No wonder that man, in his blind, passionate search for liberty and satisfaction, rebels violently at times, and at times tries to still his inner torment by throwing himself headlong into a life of feverish activity, constant excitement, tempestuous emotion, and reckless adventure. That's his paragraph called The Fundamental Infirmity of Man. And when you read it, we talk about, for us, that is called the survival stage, stage 0.
Yeah.
And it's like trying to survive our wounding. And some of the characteristics of the survival stage are compulsions and addictions, which he describes very perfectly in that last line, being in a trance, living, from the survival conditioning that we received. So he describes our survival stage, but he doesn't call it a stage.
Yeah, that's great.
And
Really
then he goes into what do you do about that? And then he goes into the 4 stages.
remaining. So what I'll just do is I'll just set them the 5 stages out because you said we haven't named them yet. I'll just name them and then we'll go back to 0 because I think I'll pick up where you were just talking about because it was so interesting. So yeah, stage 0 of this 5-stage model is survival. Stage 1, you've labeled exploration. Stage 2, the emergence of I. Stage 3, contact with self. And stage 4, response to self. So they're the 5 stages that we're going to be talking about. Going back to the stage 0, survival, like you're saying, this sort of we're in a sort of like a trance state. I wanted to make a couple of comments about that. I mean, one of which was just, is it fair to say all of the above sort of behaviors that Assagioli was describing there in that paragraph, it's all a result of primal wounding?
That's what we would say.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know that he actually says how we got to that.
Mm.
But that's what Firman and Gila would say.
Yeah, that's what you would say. And Also, because it's probably going to occur at some stage in one of the other levels, um, I just thought it would be interesting because in your book you talk about somebody in this stage being attached to a survival unifying center. And I just think it would be useful to explain what a unifying center is in case you use that language. It's very much Roberto Assagioli's language, a unifying center. Um, but I kind of see it like a psychological holding environment that we're in. And it can be another person who we look to hold us and keep us grounded. But at this survival stage, um, that holding environment or that psychological holding environment is actually not very healthy for us. It could be a parent who's not seeing us correctly, a teacher who's not supporting us in school, somebody who's abusing us, whatever. We're not being held in a
Yeah,
strong state.
yeah, you got it. That's it.
Yeah. Um,
Yeah, and that's why it's called a survival unifying center versus an authentic unifying center, which is our other term.
Authentic unifying center, yeah, which we're gonna hopefully see coming up as we go through to the other stages. Also, just I just wanted to point out as well because you talk about when someone's in this stage, what brings them to therapy. So they're in this stage, but what actually is the trigger that gets them into therapy is something called a crisis of transformation.
No,
Um,
the crisis transformation happens afterwards.
or happens afterwards.
Yeah,
Oh,
that's what moves them from stage 0 to stage 1 is the crisis of transformation.
okay, okay. And would you also talk about the crisis of transformation, another phrase for that being spiritual emergency?
That could be a crisis. I'm sorry, did you say that spiritual emergency could be a crisis of transformation? Is that
Yeah,
what you just said?
yeah, yeah. But that comes actually, okay, that comes after this stage. It comes at the end of this
That that's what helps you move out of survival and toward exploration.
was exploration. Yeah, yeah. That was sorry, I didn't communicate that very well. That's what I was trying to put over.
Okay. Yeah, and the crisis of transformation can be almost anything. It can be very powerful and it can be, more subtle, and it can be a very negative experience, or it can be what we would call a more positive experience. It
Yeah,
can
yeah.
be anything
Anything.
that
Yeah.
starts to wake us up, basically. It is really whatever it is that begins to wake us up
And there's also,
and
oh, go on.
moves us out of unconsciousness and toward increasing consciousness.
Yeah. And I just want to make another point as well that I think is somewhere in psychotherapy of love. And it's about the fact that you don't have to be when you're in the survival state, that doesn't mean that you're not functioning like in your work environment, for example. I think you could be a high functioning individual. You're just a mess inside, you know what I mean? But you can present really well, but you're going through this, you know, anxiety, tension, turmoil, but internally.
Internally and sometimes not very consciously.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, but you can be, as you say, you can be very competent. You can be very skilled in what you're doing. I mean, professionally, let's say in the world or something, and still be operating not necessarily in that professional environment, though that's possible too, but certainly in other aspects of your life, you can be operating from survival or internally feeling that.
Yeah. That's such an
That-
important thing, I think, to emphasize for people who are watching this, because, I think you'll see many people who are externally functioning. They're making a living, they're getting the job done, but when they get home or in their quiet moments, they feel terrible. And it's it's understanding that just because you're presenting well doesn't mean that necessarily you're doing okay inside, or you might be unconscious of what's really going on.
I don't want to get political, but I can point to many political figures who fit that description.
I'm sure you could. Um, shall we, have we said enough on the stage zero?
Well, just to say just to add the characteristics, it is being unconscious, but it's like living in a trance. That's what we mean by living in a trance. I'm operating from how I've been conditioned to operate. Um, and It's also a stage in which we don't have a lot of empathy often for ourselves and for others. It's a lack of empathy. And it's also a stage in which we feel fragmentation, inner fragmentation. So I just want to add those particular characteristics in talking about that stage. There's a fourth one, which is slipping my mind right now, but those are the main characteristics of being in that stage. Yeah. And then all of a sudden, something happens in our life that begins to wake us up.
Hello, I'm Lara Rucroft,
And I'm Jamie Carroll.
and we are the hosts of The Gift of Psychosynthesis, a show that brings psychosynthesis psychotherapy to a wider attention in the world.
And we're really pleased that you've joined us. If you're interested in psychosynthesis, maybe consider subscribing. And if you've enjoyed this show, please press the like button as it helps with the algorithm.
From the both of us,
Enjoy
enjoy the show.
Okay, so now we're sort of moving towards stage one, the exploration, but you're saying it's the crisis of transformation that takes you into stage one.
Yeah, and it can be anything, as I said. It can be a very high experience. It can be a very low experience. It can be anything that can occur in our life. Dissatisfaction with a job. I mean, I think what we use in our second book, we use the example of someone who's expecting a promotion at her job and then doesn't receive it, and then that becomes her crisis of transformation. And for me, I personally, when I think about it, I think it was my divorce from my first marriage was my crisis. It was my first crisis of transformation that I'm aware of. I've had other crises, but that was my first crisis of transformation.
Yeah, similar to me.
All of a sudden, who am I? What am I supposed to be doing? I thought I was supposed to be doing this, but all of a sudden I'm in a, where am I?
Where does this leave me?
Yeah, where does this? I mean, the question, going into this first stage, which we call exploration of the personality, the question or the question of that stage is, who am I? I thought I was this, and I'm discovering I am not this.
Yes.
And so who am I?
Yeah. From the client's perspective, who am I? What is it like because from a therapist perspective, because you've named this stage exploration. What is the therapist aiming to do at this point with the client?
That's a tricky question because there's a suggestion, I think, in that question that I'm sort of setting an agenda, which I am not.
Well, that's actually my point, is avoiding that, because you say in the book that the way out of this stage is for the client purely to be seen.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's being with a client and listening to, let me see, how do I respond to that question? I'm thinking of a client right now that would help me to respond to that question, who's certainly gone through these stages. It's actually beautiful to watch or to be witness to. It's just being with a person and exploring whatever they're experiencing as they're coming out of that crisis of transformation. And in being with that person and just exploring the content of what they're talking about as they're coming out of that crisis of transformation, that begins that exploration. I wish I could be more specific about that.
Well, I wanted to just quote something that you and John did write in A Psychotherapy of Love. You said you must be able to die to your world and be reborn in your client's world.
Sure.
Which I think is a very beautiful way of emphasizing the point that you made in our previous video on the primal wound. You were saying about a therapist not having an agenda.
Yeah, and that is and so if I die to my world and I'm present with the client in their world, I am just being curious about what they're experiencing, and in that curiosity that supports the exploration for the client. So there's no agenda other than to want to know who this person is to the extent they are willing and want to also know who they are. Um, yeah.
And you said something also that was, I think, was very important. You said it's not about chasing breakthroughs. Doing that is really, it really is failure. And I think that's important for therapists to hear, as well as people who are looking to go into therapy, because when they're trying to understand, both parties are trying to understand the types of behaviors that they should be seeing at this stage. It's really about the therapist having that curiosity, as you say, and the client feeling that they're being given the space to explore who they are. That's the whole point of exploration, isn't it? It's not that
Right.
not that the therapist knows who you are and is telling you who you are.
That's a very important point. It's wanting to, it's just wanting to know who this person is, who I sit with. And as I want to know, as I express that curiosity, um, that person begins to know, learns who they are very gradually. I mean, it's not very quick. It's a gradual process. Um, it's interesting. I'm just sort of, it's so hard to talk about, actually. That's what I'm sort of being aware of right now. It's hard to talk about how that process happens. I mean, when you learn, I think, how to be a therapist in various approaches, you get sort of a formula
Mm.
sort of follow. And this is not much. This is absence of as much formula as you can be absent of.
Yeah.
And, and so it really is person to person, human to human, wanting to assist this person in whatever they wish assistance with. And when we're talking about the stages, they usually want assistance in regard to the pain that they're experiencing that brought them into therapy in the first place. I mean, there's an occasional client who comes who just simply wants to explore and is not in so much pain, but most clients are in pain of some sort when they come. That's what brings them into the room or now onto the screen. Um, and so it's just wanting to be present with this person and help them find who they are, which is what they're deeply seeking usually. They're seeking themselves. Um,
I've often found from a sort of like a therapist perspective, it can be quite messy because
oh,
because you might not see what the common denominators are, the common patterns are, or you might see something, but that they're not seeing what they're really doing to themselves. For example, you might think you understand what's going on, and you might not see any progress for a number of weeks. And I think that is where it starts to become difficult, but you start to get as a therapist, well, how am I adding my value here? Because there's, as we discussed, there's no breakthroughs. There's no breakthroughs. It's basically this person going through their process and you allowing them to do it with the absence of technique, really, without when there's no approach you should be applying. It's absolutely, as you said, without a technique other
that's
than
right.
to be almost like still and to ask the right question perhaps at the right time. But that's it.
Yeah, I think it's Dan. I think it's in one of Dan. I mean, I think it's Dan Siegel. When you said messy, Dan Siegel has written a number of books, but the one that I read from cover to cover was The Mindful Therapist, and there's so much in there that resonates with psychosynthesis. And I think it's in that book that he talks about how psychotherapy is just a messy process, and I really appreciated him for saying that. Um, yes, it is messy, and in response to something you just said. Typically, people think of, in the exploration stage, what you're doing is helping people identify their different subpersonalities, parts of themselves. I mean, in case someone is listening or watching this who doesn't know psychosynthesis, subpersonalities and psychosynthesis simply means parts of oneself. Um, and and yes, you might be doing that, but you might not be doing that. So it's not even taking that model and assuming that's the model that you're going to overlay on this person when they're in stage one. And it's so easy for a psychosynthesis person to fall into that, oh, we're going to explore subpersonalities now. We're in this, this particular,
Yeah.
no, maybe Maybe not.
Because sometimes it's just too much. They want to tell you about what's going on in their life. They're not interested in a bloody model about a sub-personality that doesn't feature on their radar for quite some time. Yeah.
Yeah. So I just wanted to add that. I mean, it really is, I think, is it Assagioli says someplace that psychosynthesis is the absence of method or something like, it's the method of no method. It's the method of no method. Well, yes, to a large extent that is true, and not absolutely, because there's, we have a method of some sort. We have, assumptions and things like that. But it really is as much as possible, and that goes back to no agenda. You know, as much as possible, no agenda. But it's humanly impossible to have no agenda. But as much as possible, no agenda. I'm here to be with you. Just, I mean, there's so many things that come into my mind right now because I'm starting to write my book about being a therapist and deepening, helping clients deepen in their knowing of themselves. I have a client right now who is well, I've had clients and I've had many students who are in their internships and they just don't know how to help a client explore. And they have these formulas that have been given to them. They really don't know how to help a client explore themselves in a more deep kind of way. So that's what and so I just finished writing the preface for that book, or at least the beginning stages of that preface. And so I'm pulling together lots of different aspects to see where I'm going here. And one of the things that is true is that you can have there's no conversation that you can have in therapy that is not, is irrelevant. That every conversation, even like I always use the example of John having a client who comes into therapy one day, a client he's been seeing for a while, who's complaining about having trouble finding a place to park her car on the street. At that time, we now have permit parking, but at that time there was we live near downtown Palo Alto. There was a lot of downtown people who were parking in our neighborhoods. So you would come home from someplace and you couldn't find a parking place. Well, this client comes in, can't find a parking place, complaining about not finding a parking place. So John stayed with that content. And it developed and developed into the fact that she had a new car now and she had bought a luxury car or a car that had many luxury features. And the reason she was feeling ambivalent about having done that, at the same time, she had some physical limitations, and this car supported her in those physical limitations. And it just developed into her taking care of herself. So there was no conversation that is irrelevant. And some therapists would say, well, now let's get on to the therapy. Let's dismiss this conversation about the car, right? No, John was curious. John stayed with her. That was what was foreground for her. So I'm saying that in response to just that first stage of exploration. I mean, you could see that as exploration. She comes to some understanding and knowing of herself and the taking care of herself and talking about finding, about her car and finding difficulty in finding a parking place.
Good example. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
What can lead on from just holding that space and being patient?
Yeah. There's nothing that is therapy or not therapy when you're sitting with the client in a way, if you're willing to enter the client's world.
Anything else more to say about that stage, or do we now go on to stage 2?
Go into stage 2. I mean, stage 2 is already beginning to happen in stage 1.
Stage 2, of course, emergence of I, which we know, emergence of a sort of like I'm going to call it an observer. I don't think you use that term. You have a different way of describing the I.
We don't use that term. I mean, we can use that term, but we don't tend to use that term because a person can have a subpersonality or a part of themselves that is an observer, and that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about it's a stage in which you get a sense of yourself. You get a realization that you are distinct from all these different aspects of yourself that you're discovered in stage 1, or that you realized in stage 1. And you're getting a deeper sense of who you are that has awareness. We could talk about the two functions the characteristics of this kind of knowing, or this deep experience of yourself. You have consciousness or increasing consciousness, and you have increasing ability to well, in psychosynthesis, we say increasing will, but we mean is increasing ability to see and direct your life in a sense. So that is already starting in stage one. And then in stage two, it becomes more prominent, more developed. I mean, it makes me think of a client many, many, many years ago. I mean, I always love this example. So I don't remember some of the details, but she was working with two parts of herself that were in conflict, which is sort of like a stage one kind of process in a way, or experience. And I was having her dialogue, doing a Gestalt kind of dialogue between those two parts, and moving from chair to, or moving back and forth. What does one say to the other? What does this one say? And what does one need from the other? That kind of Gestalt conversation between two conflicting parts. And she, at one point, after a lot of that, a fair amount of that, I asked her if she would be willing to just get up and sit in a third chair and see the two that were just having this conversation. When she did that, I'll never forget it. It was like, wow. I mean, she had this incredible experience, the most profound experience, I think, of anybody I've worked with over the years, of realizing that these were just two parts of herself, that they each had needs, that they were in conflict, but that she herself deeply was, I don't even know what her words were, she was someone who could witness this, who could hold this, but she wasn't necessarily either one of them. They were parts of who she was. And I mean, it was so profound that when she left, she said, when she came back at the next session, she said that she went back to her office where she worked, and she was telling everybody about this experience, and that they had to have this experience. You know, I mean, it was the most profound experience of having that sense of knowing who you are, distinct from the different parts of oneself, yet still engaged with them, but distinct from them. And so you can call that the observer, because it was sort of an observation she was making or having, but it was more profound than that. That's why I don't like to use the term observer. It's just a deep experience of who I am that, yeah, that's all I can say.
Beautiful way of putting it, a deep experience of who I am. Is it also around that sort of, when you're having that deep experience of who you are, that you find you've got the ability to catch yourself thinking or feeling something without, you're no longer automatically accepting this thought or this feeling as your entire reality? You're a little, you're detached from it. You can see that there's something playing out here.
Yeah.
That doesn't to be you.
You have that ability.
And you mentioned us earlier that about this sort of this.
Can I add something here? Just to add, you know, I think it's relevant here, or it fits here. It's like walking through my day, which I do sometimes, walking through my day with whatever I'm involved in, and pausing for a moment and saying, what is it I need right now? You know, what is it I need right now? That is me from a deeper place within myself. Again, it's words just fail us right here, I think. From a deeper place within me, recognizing that there are aspects of myself that may have needs right now. And that's sort of is what you were saying just a minute ago or 30 seconds ago. It's like knowing me and being willing to be aware of parts of myself, for example, that may need something in this moment. Yeah, I just wanted to add that. I'm not sure where to go further with that.
Well, it's like filtering out the noise of what the environment wants, or what your automatic reflexes are for something. It's being able to just hear yourself, like what is it that you really, knowing what you really need or what you want to do. And it comes back to that point that you were saying about this emergence of I, is like this, about this ability to exercise more will, you know, be able to do things that you want to do, that you know are right for you, as well as that consciousness of understanding yourself better. There's that consciousness, and then there's the will, and they're sort of traveling together now. They're emerging in a way that wasn't there at stage one.
Yeah, that's like, I like that, traveling together. Yeah, that's nice. That's a nice term or phrase, traveling together. Yeah. There was another thought, but it's gone now. That's fine.
Okay. Stage three then, contact with self. What characterizes this stage?
What's my life about? What am I called to do? What's meaningful? Those are the questions. Very simply. Now that I've got a personality maybe that functions, or where I am functioning better in the world. I'm not sure what better is the right term, but anyway, functioning better in the world, more harmoniously. I have a more harmonious personality. I've worked out some of my inner conflicts. I'm in less pain. I know more who I am. What am I to do in the world? What matters to me?
And could we add to that as well, that those sort of questions are upwelling because an increased connection with something higher than ourselves. We call it in psychosynthesis the self, but we don't specify what that is. I think you used to call it me and my God, but you're having that sort of connection going on, and those questions are rising up because you feel like you want to be in alignment with what that higher wisdom in some way.
Yeah, and I think that's already happening earlier, I think you just said that. It's already happening. It may be happening, yeah, it's already happening earlier, but it becomes more pronounced. And you may, not necessarily, but you may seek out activities more in life that support that. Maybe you haven't been meditating and you start meditating, or it can be a variety of different kinds of activities, read spiritual literature, whatever. And so you may become more active in doing that, trying to connect it to, well, to the larger whole is one of the ways to say it. And what is the larger whole calling of you? I mean, what is it asking you of you? I think there's a phrase that I read somewhere. You had a car that had it's sort of a weird, but anyway, you had a car that was not functioning very well, and now you have a well-running car and everything's running fine. But where is that car going to go? Where are you going to go with that car? It's functioning well now. It's been that's had the servicing that it needed or whatever. It's sort of a funny kind of analogy, but anyway, yeah. So I mean, we tend to say that our connection to the greater or the whole, the larger, is more pronounced in this stage, but it's already happening. I mean, I think if I think about my crisis, the first crisis, significant crisis of transformation that I had when I mentioned a divorce, I mean, I was already asking that question, even though I was in crisis of transformation and had years of stage one exploration after that, and emergence of I. But I was already asking that question early on. So it's hard to say this is specifically, and I think we've already said it, this is exactly this stage, this is exactly this stage, because the stages can be, more than one stage can be happening at the same time. But it's to tease them apart, that's what we're doing in stage three.
Perhaps also with this pronounced purpose, meaning, and value sort of exploration, it's more explicit at this level. You're more consciously aware that you're doing it. But I also just wanted to pick up on something that we spoke about earlier about unifying centers. And whereas before we might have been in a survival unifying center at stage zero, now we're kind of encountering this wisdom, the self, via authentic unifying centers potentially as well. We could meet somebody who inspires us to meditate, or to paint, or to change our job and do something that feels more in alignment with what we want to do. Is that right in saying?
Well, yes, but at the same time, I would add that the authentic unifying center is relevant all along the way. I mean, for say stage one, if you're in therapy and exploration, that therapist absolutely needs to be an authentic unifying center. And that that therapist as an authentic unifying center supports the emergence of I. I mean, they see you and then you get to know who you are. And so that authentic unifying center is necessary all along the way. But it can be, maybe it's more, I'm not sure if I would say it's more pronounced in stage 3.
I just wasn't sure where to read. I had it in my notes for stage 3, but I'm glad you said it actually is important all the way through. But there's something else I also wanted to pick up on as well, because you talk about this term induction, which is about really patterns. Some patterns worsen at this stage as obstacles are faced. Could you speak a little bit more about that?
I'll tell you where my mind goes. My mind goes to an exercise that we used to do in our training program. And I think this fits. We would do an exercise where we would set the stage and say that whatever you consider the greater to be, whatever you call it, whether you call it God, self, divine, the larger whole, presence, whatever that is for you, it's going to call you on the telephone right now. And it's going to tell you what you're being called to. And so you have a choice of whether to pick up the phone or not. And we actually had a phone in the room at the time, and John would set it up to ring at that point. And everybody would sit with whether they were willing to pick up the phone and hear what they were being called to. And notice what their reaction was as the phone rang. Notice if they picked it up, what they heard. Notice what their response was to what they heard. And that is speaking to, I think, what you just asked. What arises in me when I get a message, when I feel something I'm called to, what it is triggered in me, and often it's not often, but sometimes it is, something that I need to address. It sends me back. I think I said this earlier. It sends me back to exploring something. That's the induction. Something gets inducted in me that wants to resist that call, that doesn't want to respond to that call, that is afraid. Often it's fear. Go ahead.
Yeah, we've gone so far. And suddenly we sort of we've reached quite a level metaphorically, and we're looking down, and suddenly we realize, gulp, how high we are, and how scary it is suddenly.
Yeah, and so then that calls us back to then exploration, which I think I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation. It's like, what just happened? What is that feeling I'm having that doesn't, it was the feeling of not wanting to pick up the telephone, in that exercise that we did. I mean, some people didn't want to pick up the telephone and would not, or some people, one of the common responses back then was they would do what do you call it? They would screen the call before they would pick it up. It's a great exercise.
Yeah. Cool. Design, yeah. That was really interesting, actually. Yeah, I don't have anything more to say on that particular stage. No, I think we've covered it. So we're at the final stage then, which is stage 4, response to self. What's this all about?
It's responding to what I hear I'm called to. So it's a stage in which we are then looking at what is it I need to do in order to respond to this call. I think if anyone is familiar with the stages of the active will, it's sort of that last stage in he has 6 stages of the active will, is planning. It's okay, what am I to do, or what do I need to do, or what do I need to put into action, or what do I need to develop, or whatever, in order to respond to this call. It could be that there's something in me that I need to develop, or maybe there's, working with a part of myself who still has some fear or anxiety about following that call. Or it may be very practical. It may be I need to raise enough money to follow that call. I'm called to distribute money to the homeless on the street. I mean, and not money, but food to the homeless on the street. Maybe I need to raise the money for that. How do I go about doing that? That's what I'm called to do in my life. Yeah, so it is looking at the practical, in a sense, the practical action that needs to be taken in order to follow that call. I mean, it's as basic as that.
I noted it down here as aligning personal will with transpersonal will. I don't know if
Yeah,
that. Um,
sure.
just to distinguish it from the previous stage, then, just to take your analogy, that if stage three was screening the call from the divine or listening to what's being said, is stage four then the decision you're going to act on what the divine has suggested? Is that really what the distinction is? Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm using a very personal example right now. I know I'm called to write this book that I just mentioned earlier. I know I'm called to write it. It has been there for close to a year now, maybe, or even a little longer. I'm called to write this book. I am clear about that. However, following that call is another matter. I have to go through parts of me that don't want to do that, who are afraid that they can't do that, et cetera, et cetera. And then just recently, I finally turned the corner and I'm beginning to be able to believe or trusting that I can do it. And it's starting to set periods of time when I will address it, or I will address it in these various ways. Like, okay, I'm going to browse. We have over 1,000 books here in this house, more than that. And I'm going to browse the books that I think are relevant to what I'm writing. And I'm going to start browsing them to sort of create some iron filings for the creative process in me. And that is, an action that I have set and I'm doing in order to create more iron filings for the writing that I know I'm called to do. And I've just reached that point where I am able to start browsing those books with that intention. And so that is my stage 4 action right now,
Right, I get
to
that.
follow through with that call that I have been putting aside, avoiding, not wanting to do, or wanting to do, but just have so many obstacles to doing.
Being overwhelmed. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and okay, so now you're making it happen. You're
And I'm sorry, go ahead. I'm making it
aligning
happen. And
with the higher will, like this is going to happen. Mm.
well, this is going to happen, but I imagine that there will be more moments of wanting to pull back from it. And then having, there will be moments, I'm sure there will be moments, and I will have to then go back to stage 1 and exploration and say what's going on right now.
Sure, it's not like a flicker switch and it's done. It's a constant, yeah, process of moving around those stages, and you're trying to understand yourself more and more.
Yeah, and then maybe that's why the 12 steps in 12-step programs, for example, AA or something, they say recovery is forever. You're doing the 12 steps forever. That may be why. I mean, you have to keep going back because you're gonna encounter something that is gonna send you back. Because there's always something to explore, but you don't explore it. I mean, as Assagioli says, you explore it only when it's an obstacle. I mean, he more or less said that. You don't go searching in the unconscious just for the sake of searching in the unconscious. You go searching in the unconscious when it's an obstacle to what you're called to, basically.
Mhm. Yeah. Um, that, thank you. That's really interesting. I've got a couple more questions that are just related to the five-stage model. I mean, this is a sort of a classic question that how long is a piece of string? Is like some people are going to ask, well, how long will it take to get to stage four? I mean, I know it's a ridiculous question, but it's also not. I mean, many people will ask it. They'll think literally like or linearly like that. So how would you answer that?
Well, they wouldn't ask, I mean, unless they know psychosynthesis, they wouldn't ask it that way, right? Are you saying someone who knows psychosynthesis and asks it that
Yeah.
way?
Let's assume someone who knows a bit about it, or they've watched this video and they followed it through, and they're like, okay, so how do I get to stage four? How long?
Um, one of my favorite phrases that I often used in my teaching is, it's in God's time, not mine. I mean, it's true. I mean, well, first of all, I would remind them that the stages are all happening or can all be happening at the same time. Even if you get to stage 4, you're probably going to hit some obstacle, which is going to throw you back, just like I was saying, into stage one. Here's another example. So you get to stage four, you feel a sense of what you're called to, you're planning it, and all of a sudden you notice you're being really compulsive about something. What is that about? What is that compulsivity? That throws me back actually to stage zero. And then I start moving through again. So that is just the way it happens. I mean, unless I guess, I don't know, maybe there's somebody in the world who's so something that they can know what they're called to, begin to actualize it, have a smooth course of it, not stumble across any obstacles. I don't think so.
Yeah, I mean,
I mean,
back to the AA point you made, isn't it? Really, that it's an ongoing process. I don't think even when you're in stage four, you're still experimenting with stage zero at various stages. It's a circular process.
yeah, I mean, who is it? Is it Groff who talks about that? Stanislav Grof? I think anyway, it's a spiral, and I mean, you use this a spiral model and you hit the same issue over and over again, but at different levels.
Mhm.
I mean, maybe that idea.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it, actually. Yeah. The other question I've got, this is really more for psychosynthesis therapists or those who are in training. This is and it came up for me, so this is why I ask it, which is, psychosynthesis most famous model is Assagioli's egg diagram, which is like a map of consciousness. So, and the question is, what's the difference between the egg and the 5 stages?
Well, in the 5 stages, in exploration, as Assagioli actually says this in his discussion of stage one, you're not exploring just lower unconscious content. You're also exploring often higher unconscious content too. So, what your question was, what is the difference? And so I think that's my answer, is that you're exploring all of who you are, if it's relevant to do, if it's there for you to do. Not that it's an agenda, but if that is what is arising in exploring what brought you to therapy, you're often exploring higher and lower, which is part of the egg.
Yeah, yeah, that's good. That's a good response. I mean, how I looked at it was I wrote down the egg shows us the components of the consciousness, but the
Sure.
5 stages shows us how far we've come in bringing the lower and bringing the lower and the higher unconscious parts into the full awareness of our consciousness. That's how
Wait, say that. Wait, say that whole thing again. Tell me what that. Just repeat that if you can.
I said the egg shows us the components of the consciousness, like all the bits that you see in
Well, of unconsciousness.
unconscious, middle level, awareness and higher.
Okay.
It shows us that, but the 5 stages shows us how far we've come in like integrating the lower and the higher bits of the egg into our full awareness. So they're no longer unconscious. The more you go up those stages, the wider the sort of middle unconscious or the field of consciousness should be in the egg as you're going up. That's how I would view it. Does that seem
Yeah,
right?
I have trouble with the up part of it.
Well, reframe it. Help me out. Reframe. How would you phrase it?
Um, well, I guess I would just simply say that in exploration, we become more, I mean, we can become, not doesn't necessarily happen for everyone. You become more aware of content of higher and lower, but not necessarily. I mean, sometimes it's more focused on lower. Um, and I'm not sure I can put those together in that same way. And that because through all the stages, there is higher and lower. I mean, in stage three, what you're called to, you could say, well, that is expressing probably aspects of higher unconscious, but what you stumble across is aspects of lower unconscious. So I think both are present throughout all of the stages, actually. That's what I would say.
Maybe
And And I would avoid the upper, it's talking about up the stage. I think you said up the stages or something. And it's like,
Well, different stage. I mean, at different stages, I'd expect to see the composition of Assagioli's egg all shift. That's what I would be expecting.
okay, no, that is true. As one explores oneself, well, just even in exploration, if you are in the exploration stage, you're becoming more aware, perhaps, of both lower unconscious content and higher unconscious content. As a result of that, the middle unconscious is expanding.
Yeah, that's
Yes,
a great way of putting it. That's I think what I was aiming for. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, that expansion happens.
And it seems like a pedantic thing, but to think about two models, but actually, people who encounter this, we're bombarded by models. Like, how do they fit? How do we fit them together? This is an important point. So, thank you for helping to sort of unpick that and help explain that. So, I
Well,
think,
let me add something too. Going back to that expansion of the middle unconscious. I guess I want to say this because I just always thought it was such a lovely, I don't know, thing that happened in our classes. When John would talk about the expansion of the middle unconscious, and how we become conscious in exploration, we become conscious of content in the higher and then conscious, we may become conscious of content in the higher and conscious of content in the lower. That we use the term, I think it's C.S. Lewis's term, surprised by joy. Surprised by joy, surprised by pain. We're surprised by higher, we're surprised by lower, eruption, and then John would say, and this was always so lovely in our classes, he'd say, in this room right now, there's more joy in this room than we know, and there's more pain in this room than we know, meaning that each one of us is holding unconsciously more joy and more pain. And it was always so touching, and I mean, for everyone in the room when he would say that, and it was like looking around the room and realizing that each individual there was holding more joy and more pain than we were conscious of. Yeah. Okay.
thank you for sharing that. That was really lovely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we have come to the end. I think we've explored 5 stages. So I just want to thank you for that. That's been really helpful.
You're welcome.
And I hope it's going to be just, really interesting for trainee therapists and also those who are thinking of just going into therapy. It just gives you a more of an insight about how deep and considered psychosynthesis is, and yeah, what we're looking to achieve basically as we go through these processes. So
Mhm.
thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you for the conversation.